Hello, my name is Helen Crossan, Executive Director of the Cold Spring Harbor Library and Environmental Center, here today with Kate Lively to introduce Community Conversations.
Hi, I'm Kate Lively. For the last 18 years, Leadership Huntington has been developing, connecting, and engaging active citizens in our town.
Public libraries in the 21st century seek to transform their communities by identifying issues, values, and solutions within the communities they serve.
We are pleased to engage in this partnership to serve our shared community and grateful for the warm support of the Huntington League of Women Voters, the Huntington Township Chamber of Commerce, and the Town of Huntington.
Community Conversations is a public forum engaging local experts and residents to identify and discuss local issues.
The second in our series was entitled Growing Community. Who are we? How do we live together?
So I'm going to start the program off by an introduction of our fine panelists this evening, and we'll proceed along with some presentation and discussion by our panel. First, starting on this end of the table, Craig Turner. Craig is a planner in the Town of Huntington Department of Planning and Environment. His work includes review of land development applications, drafting of zoning legislation, and preparation of planning studies. Craig also sits on the board of directors for the Leadership Huntington Foundation. Next in line, Jocelyn Wenk is an associate director of the Long Island Index. Jocelyn manages also Build a Better Burg. So if you've been on the Long Island Index website and part of their program, you have seen and will see more from Build a Better Burg, which is an index website that provides ideas for revitalizing suburban downtowns. Prior to working with the Roush Foundation, or Long Island Index, part of the Roush Foundation, Jocelyn worked as an urban planner at the Long Island office of AKRF, an outstanding environmental consulting firm that I've had some privileges to work with along the way as well. Next, we have Robert Hoppenstedt from Bethpage Federal Credit Union. Robert is the Senior Vice President of Marketing and Operations. And among many community involvements, Robert is involved in the United Way of Long Island and the Urban League of Long Island. And at the end of the table, Ed Carr. Ed Carr is the Director of Maritime Services for the Town of Huntington. He's also a co-owner of a tugboat and barge company in New York City. Must be a very interesting experience as well, and I appreciate that. Prior to the town and the tugboat company, Ed also worked for over 20 years as an engineer and later as a lobbyist for Keyspan Energy. And I know I've worked with Ed over the years in that capacity as well. Ed is also the village historian for the village of Asheville. So I think that's also a tremendous talent and a piece of the community. So the way we're going to get the program started tonight is we're going to start at this end with Craig, and we've asked the panelists to take a look at the data that you've seen in terms of who we are and how we live, and pick out a couple of important or specifically relevant points from their perspective and their role. And so we'll start off with Craig.
Hi, my name is Craig Turner. I'm a planner with the Town of Huntington. I'm going to talk a little bit about housing choice. It's something I deal with at work every day. And undoubtedly, if you read the newspaper or watch TV on a regular basis, a lot of what comes up as housing issues in the town of Huntington and Long Island, you always hear the idea, oh, we don't want this Long Island to look like Queens. It's always Queens. No one has a problem with the Bronx or Brooklyn. Somewhere along the way, Queens did something to residents of Long Island, and they don't like it. And the idea that comes through is that somehow, Queens is the city, and Long Island, Nassau, Suffolk is the suburbs, and we're different. And there's one thing for Queens, and there's one thing for Long Island, and this is the way the suburbs are. And I think a lot of that information comes from our background, probably more than a lot of other metropolitan areas. This is really all we know. People who live on Long Island, their families emigrated into New York City. After a generation or a few generations, they moved out to Long Island. So this is really our sphere of knowledge. We haven't gotten around a lot to really get involved with how other communities work. And I think that's one of these reasons why we have these ideas that you're so different. When we talk about housing choice specifically, I'm going to talk about a way that Long Island differs from pretty much the entire rest of the country and really the rest of the world. And that is the percentage of units in Huntington and in Long Island that are detached single-family homes. We went through the 2011 American Community Survey, put Huntington as about 85% of our housing stock is detached single-family homes. Suffolk County, it's 80%. Nassau County, that's 75%. And when you hear people saying, we don't want this to be Queens, they're saying, we like this detached single-family housing stock. This is what we're used to. This is what we think the suburbs are, and we think everyone else is like us. But if you look at the census statistics, you really find that's not true, and we're actually quite different from most of the rest of the country. As I said, in Huntington, we're sitting at 85% at detached single-family housing stock. The country as a whole, that number is 60%. We're 25% off the average for the nation. And you might think, well, the whole country, that's a large place you're comparing things to. Well, if you want to just look in our own backyard outside of New York City, you take that 85%, you take that 80% in Suffolk, that's 75% in Nassau. Fairfield County, Connecticut, very similar to Suffolk. Their number is at 56%. Bergen County, New Jersey, their percentage detached single-family housing, 53%. Westchester County, again, very similar comparison to us in Suffolk, 45%. 40% less, or almost half less than the town of Huntington, closing on half less than Suffolk County. Want to go to the other side of the country, Orange County, outside Los Angeles. Again, very similar demographically, very similar to the Suffolk County town of Huntington. Their percentage is 51%. So you see, Huntington and Long Island as a whole, we're the oddball. We're different from every place else. You know, and that's something we fight on every day. So when people are bringing applications and say, well, why are people bringing in applications for rental housing? Why are people bringing in applications for townhouses? It's because that's what's the norm. We're the exception to the norm. And there's a couple of good reasons to be concerned with this. One is our aging population. I always say in my job for the town, the number one advocacy call I get is seniors looking for senior housing. And what they mean is people who no longer want to live in their detached single-family house. They're looking for a low or no maintenance housing option, and there's very limited supply out there. And as our community ages, we have more and more people looking for an alternative housing type, and it's just not met on Long Island, and that becomes a big problem with trying to retain our seniors. The other issue we have is really a nationwide trend, a change in demographics. We have people getting married later. We have a larger number of divorced spouses, divorced families. There's a good reason to need a lot of different housing options. A couple of years ago, the Census Bureau announced the typical household that used to be two married parents with children in the house now is less than 50% of the U.S. population. It's no longer it's still the majority, but it's no longer really the norm.
We keep talking about housing and that we can't get housing, we don't have housing, we need to do high density and build and develop. But what's not being mentioned here is that our town governments, although we have many sections that are multifamily zoned, the town is preventing them from becoming multifamily and making it difficult for parents to make an apartment for their children in their home, or seniors with no kids who have to go to reverse mortgage to put an apartment so they're not in their home alone and can provide an inexpensive apartment. I have been to several zoning board meetings, read several files, and the town, although R5 is multi-zoned, multifamily, they put a definition that you can't have two main buildings on the same property. even if it meets all the other zoning codes, all the setbacks, the height of the building and everything, the town decided that they were going to prevent people from having the multifamily that we need in Huntington and around for our children to live in. We don't need to do high density, we don't need to take open land that should stay open for our groundwater and other needed necessities. So I'm just concerned that I've never seen in all these types of meetings over the 24 years I've lived here, the community development, for them to address this problem of the zoning codes and what our town is restricting us from doing that we're entitled to and is there. Thank you.
Okay, I'm just going to start off a little bit as the moderator, so to take a little liberty here, because I'm really happy to have Craig, and I think he's a quintessential professional. I think part of the question you're asking, though, goes more to the political will issue, which may be an issue addressed in November sometime. I think what we should allow Craig to point out is, as I kind of engaged in the early conversation, what needs to be done to do what you're asking in terms of code changes, zoning changes, the kind of priorities that need to be set.
Well, there's no zoning changes involved. The zones for multifamily already exist, and everything is in the town code, and everything can be done, except our town board in Huntington. I don't know about other townships on Long Island, but our town wrote one line that says, even though it's multifamily zone, you can have apartments and stuff, we're going to put this one line so you can't do what you're allowed to do. And that's basically what it is. It's saying you can't have two main buildings. You can't have an accessory apartment. But we're zoned for multifamily, and we have all the property and the setbacks and everything. Why can't we?
So maybe you can answer a little bit in terms of that code, or how that's viewed by the town in terms of implementing the code.
Well, basically, there's different ways you can sort of get multifamily housing. You could develop house units on a lot. The town's primary program of providing additional housing units, what we call the accessory apartment law, that homes that are owner-occupied, that meet certain restrictions, a lot of it in dealing with your neighborhood, area restrictions, 7,500 square foot lots, 75 feet of lot width, is a requirement for accessory apartments. So, but basically the idea is it's an owner-occupied unit. The town comes, you go to the accessory apartment review board. I believe it's every 2 years to renew. A town inspector inspects it every year to make sure, health and safety concerns are being addressed. And that's the primary way the town has allowed apartments in people's homes. Different communities have different restrictions. Some communities allow two-family homes as of right in certain areas. As you mentioned, some communities allow mother-daughter dwellings or secondary, apartment units attached to garages. Those are not currently allowed by the town of Huntington.
And I think it could be good for people who are interested, people who lose.
There's a lot of different household sizes and types out there, and so it's important to have a lot of different housing options out there so that we can meet all the demands of the marketplace, so that we can attract employers into Long Island, because the employers these days, where's the U.S. growing? Technology, they call high tech. Long Island, they talk about biotech, pharmaceuticals, college degrees. These are people coming out of college. They don't want to be living in their parents' basement till they're 35. You have a lot of people getting married later, starting families later. You have to have a housing stock to meet the demand. And so I think it's really important to say that when we talk about what is Long Island, what is the suburbs, that Long Island is not the norm. Thank you.
Thank you, Greg. We're going to proceed with the panel, and then of course we're going to have the really spotlight of the conversation is questions from the audience. But since I'm standing here, I sort of get this, the first question. One thing that jumps out at me, and I think should jump out of the audience on that, so we always hear about the affordability crisis. What you're also saying is we're linked to the lack of choice crisis as well. And what's the main constraining element of that? What constrains those choices?
I think you have several options. Huntington locally, we do have concerns. We don't have a lot of public sewer, and that's really true of a lot of the North Shore of Long Island. To achieve the high densities, to achieve additional, alternate housing types, you do need sewer capacity to install that. You also have just a lot of people feel, as I said, apartments are queens, townhouses are queens. It's a mindset that the way we grew up in Levittown and developed from there is the way the suburbs are supposed to be developed, where if you look across the rest of the country, it's not necessarily that way. And a lot of people usually the number one concern people talk about is housing values, community values. If you look at some of these other areas, you look at Westchester, Fairfield, Orange County, obviously these are not communities that have problems with their housing values. In fact, a lot of these communities, their median housing values are higher than the town of Huntington. So I think the idea that apartments or townhouses means a lower income product, a lower income population, is just not borne out by actual numbers.
Thank you. And for people who know me, we're not going to get 10 minutes into the program without mentioning sewers. Okay, so we'll hear more about it. Jocelyn, I'm going to skip over you because we're going to have a little presentation on the screen later from you. So, Robert, if you will.
Oh, okay. I thought I was going to go last, so I'd have to go over everybody else's topic. Well, first of all, let me put it here this way: that one of the things, and I guess I'm alone here, being the banker of the group, is we look to growth, and without growth in population, without growth in economics, communities can't grow. So we look to the youth, and we've all heard of this one thing that's going on, and that's the youth flight from Long Island. All of us have children. I have a son that lives in the middle of New York City. Why does he live there? Because he rents a small apartment, and he's right in the middle of the action. He's 30 years old, and that's where he wants to be. And I'm sure there's a lot of other people in the audience that say the same thing. Why do they go to New York? Why do they go to Boston? Why do they go to Austin? Why do they go to Washington? They go there, I saw that in your thing, very good. They go there because, it's a happening spot. Tom Swazi sort of introduced this idea, and I realize we're in Suffolk and not Nassau County, and Tom is running for election, and I'm not supporting Tom, and anyway, I'm not giving a political endorsement at least. But Tom actually said, he sort of came up with this thing, cool towns, and he's right. The town of Babylon, Huntington Village, Patchogue, where they're trying to go, all these places, and what the idea of Hempstead is to create a cool town where there's apartments, where people can live above stores, live above restaurants, live above places to have entertainment. You've read a little bit about what's going on with Nassau Coliseum and that whole area as part of the Hempstead renovation. It's really important. And, the stats, are not dissimilar. Part of the problem, too, is as you talk to the housing issue, and we all know this is part of the political conversation, is tax rates. Just to give a fast one on that one, if we look at Huntington, the average tax rate, or the average percentage of median household income that goes to taxes is 8.46. Nassau on the whole is 8.96. Suffolk on the whole is 8.24. But the U.S. is 3.4. And it's a big country, and it goes across the way. But property taxes obviously are a burden on people. The whole issue of not having rental properties is huge. In terms of the town of Huntington, 17% is the statistics that I have are rentals, okay? Whereas, the median gross rent of that is $1,600 a month. Now, you're 25 years old, you're just out of college, how do you do that? You live at home with mom and dad, or you go elsewhere. That's a very serious problem, and that's one that we have to look at. What I saw in Jocelyn's thing, and she has on here, is beaches. We have great beaches, but beaches alone aren't enough to really attract the youth. We were all young once, and we all want to do things. Now, it's interesting that we all sort of look at Queens as we don't want to be in Queens. The reason that the Whitestone Bridge took to build until 1939 was the people of Queens didn't want the people of Bronx invading. So, and it wasn't until the 1939 World's Fair that they were able to get that up. But you know, one of the things that I've learned in Long Island is if you scratch a Long Islander, you actually come up with somebody who immigrated from Queens. So I think quite honestly a lot of that is, oh, we just don't want to do that. But in all seriousness, the rental situation is huge because, you know, people have to start somewhere. And I was having this discussion with somebody today. When I was young, 50% of my income went to my rent, but 50%. I mean, we're talking far more than that today. When you talk $1,600, it's a lot more. Plus heat, plus electricity, it adds up. So, you know, and as we look, I think one of the things we look to South Huntington with this train station, what's going on there in Wyandanch, Ronkonkoma, you know, those projects are really vitally important. And we all want to say, not in my backyard, but it's got to be in somebody's backyard someplace for this growth to happen. Unfortunately, we live in a community that is built. You know, in 1950s, people came to Long Island, they moved to Levittown because Grumman was there, which is where Bethpage Federal Credit Union started. And, you know, but then it moved slowly eastward. And we're running out of land. There's not a lot of free land. Part of my job is to build branches throughout Long Island. It's very difficult to find things. It's easy in the South. So I just want to, the last statistic I'll sort of leave you with, it's fascinating to go on this sort of subject. But according to the stats that we have, is there were only 6 out of the last, 7 years, 6 houses that were actually multifamily residential units that were approved in the town of Huntington. It just won't work. You got to have multiple. It's got to go on. That's the only way the youth is going to stay. It's the only way we're going to see growth, because we can't put a freestanding house, a detached single house, on a 1 acre anymore. It's just not. It's not going to happen. So that's kind of the downbeat, I guess. Jocelyn will be far more upbeat than I am. I saw her presentation. But that's the reality, and we really need to keep the youth on Long Island. We really need to have the economic growth, because that's where we're going to go in the future. Thank you.
One section we really started and ended was with respect to growth, and I think, well, clearly accommodating growth is a major issue, and fostering growth of the right housing choices. But I think the other point that you're making is to separate growth as not just being housing starts, but growth in the economy. And I think Long Island struggles with that as well, and I'm sure you see that in your everyday banking business.
Yeah, and one of the things that's very difficult this time is jobs, and it's jobs for the youth. We employ a lot of young people who have gotten out of college and were looking to be teachers, especially in education. I started off my life, looking to be a teacher, and it's very difficult today with the cutbacks and so forth that these kids are coming out and they've paid so much for their education. They've given so much. They're so bright. And they're doing jobs and things that they didn't prepare their career for. And that's disheartening, because, we all, part of our mission, as Bethpage, is to grow and to give people jobs and give them livelihoods and careers. And that's so key. And we can't just live in a service economy. That's just not going to happen. We can't put up a casino and say that's growth. That's not going to happen. We have to support manufacturing. We have to support the small businesses. And we went through this transformation. I'm sorry to take this up, but we went through this transformation at Bethpage. We were Grumman's credit union. That's who we were till the 1990s. And what was that? That was 25,000 people employed by Grumman and all their families. And it was easy street. And then what happened? The Cold War ended. Ronald Reagan said, bring this wall down. Boom, down it came. Grumman slowly disappeared. And as you saw, now we're down to about 1,000 employees. Okay? What did we have to do? We had to expand, we had to grow, we had to make something different. So we expanded our charter out to all of Long Island. And that is so key. As we grow, as we expand, we have to embrace the future, not say, oh gee, we could just limp along and still be with Grumman's employees and just be nowhere. But instead, we grew, we expanded, because we took the future and we went with it. And that's key.
I'm going to change gears a little bit. When Michael and Katie had asked that we look at statistics, I wanted to try and do something a little bit different than the materials that we had. So I looked on the internet last night, and the way I approached it is I tried to think both as a new member of the town workforce. I've never worked for government before, so this is my first foray into that. And previous to that, I had worked for a utility and also as a private investor in a New York City tug and barge company. New York has a lot of challenges. We all know from reading Newsday and being educated in this room about young people leaving and high taxes. And I tried to approach it to think to myself, if you could really identify or distill all of this down to one sentence and say, what single thing could you change to make Long Island more competitive for business, to really bring jobs in? If you could change one thing, what would it be? So I looked at a whole bunch of statistics. I looked at the high cost of electricity and how much more we pay than other areas in the nation. I looked at pension costs for public employees in Tier 1, Tier 2, and what those mean going out forward with health benefits and everything. I looked at the cost of not having intermodal trains and transport, having to truck everything in on the LIE or roads as opposed to having a cross-harbor tunnel and freight delivery. I looked at a lot of things, and one of the things that really stuck in my head that I kept coming back to, the statistic, had to do with the high cost of health care, which has actually outstripped everything since 1965 nationwide, but it's especially poignant in the state of New York. New York State in 1965, when Lyndon Johnson first proposed Medicare and Medicaid, no state had any costs. There was no Medicare, Medicaid, or Medicare. So in 1965, you basically have a graph that starts from zero, for those of you that can see this. And in New York State, it's increased anywhere from a low of 5% to a high of 9% compounded every single year, to the point where healthcare in New York State is now just under half of the entire New York State budget. It's become such a big gorilla in the room, the 800-pound gorilla in the budgetary negotiations with the Speaker of the Assembly, the Majority Leader of the State Senate, and the Governor every year, that they've pushed these mandates now down onto counties. So as you know, Suffolk County and Nassau County now have to chip in for this health program. Some counties, like Livingston County, upstate New York, 80% of the entire county budget of Livingston County is now going to Medicaid, Medicare. The reason this is especially problematic for New York State is the four biggest states in the nation, population-wise, are California, with 38 million people, and then followed by Florida, New York, and Texas. Those are basically the big four. And they all have areas that are similar to Nassau and Suffolk County. California has Orange County. Texas has the Dallas-Fort Worth hub that they put a lot of tech down there. So every one of these states has some type of tech area. Florida just attracted in Mayport the Grumman employees that are in Newsday is moving down there. We're going to lose more jobs. If you take the combined population of Texas and California, which is about 55 million people, and you compare that to New York's population of 18 million people, our healthcare costs, which is half our state budget, is almost exceeding those two states combined, despite the fact that those two states, California alone, has more people on Medicaid than New York State alone, without Texas thrown in the mix. So this is absolutely huge. And when you combine that with the grain of Long Island, and you look at the statistics that we just filled out, how there's an 8% increase in the 45 to 64 year age bracket for the town of Huntington, as more and more young people choose to live elsewhere. This statistic really impacts everything, and what makes it more problematic is that the healthcare industry in New York actually employs more lobbyists, and I worked as a lobbyist in Albany for 10 years for the utility. But the healthcare industry employs more lobbyists because hospitals, nursing homes, home healthcare workers, they're getting the Medicaid situation is so dysfunctional now that you have armed lobbyists that are up in Albany that are just trying to keep the status quo. And anybody who tries to change that, it's almost created a juggernaut. And I just think that this is such a challenge. And you look at some of the latest issues in Newsday with County Executive Balone, with the Foley Health Center, or the increases in the problems that the county budget is having in Suffolk County. In New York State, if New York's Medicaid program was similar to other states. And what I mean by similar to other states is that when Lyndon Johnson enacted this in 1965, back when healthcare nationwide was really not that expensive. Most workers, if you worked in Newsday or just any company, you were automatically pretty much given health benefits. It wasn't where today you have so many part-time workers where the company doesn't offer benefits because it's running about $2,000 a month per family, so it's a $24,000 nut if you hire a person to work for your library or your school district. Back when healthcare was affordable, Lyndon Johnson said, you have to offer these many benefits. And these many benefits are, you need stitches, you have a broken arm, you fell off your bicycle, whatever these 150 little line item things are. If you go to a hospital, you need Medicaid, and you don't have health insurance. New York, but states were told you could pick this much, but you can expand it if you want. So New York State, being a very progressive, very liberal state in 1965, chose to expand the Medicaid program so that if you, let's say, not to pick on the Bronx, which we seem to be doing, but there's a case at the New York State Assembly, many members of the Assembly always bring up, that if you live in the Bronx and you're over the age of, I think, 70 years old, and you need you need to have your toenails clipped, rather than knock on your neighbor's door and say, look, I'm old, I can't bend over, I need my toenails clipped, Medicaid will pay for a taxi. They'll pay for you to go to a podiatrist for $75. You can do this twice a month. You roll up all of these costs. It's like $200 a month for someone to get their toenails clipped. New York State offers such a generous Medicaid package that what's happened is, as I said, it's really bankrupting the state. And this transcends, I think, down into everything. High cost of living, high cost of housing. So I've spoken enough on that one.
Thank you, Ed. Okay, Jocelyn, I'm going to give to you, and I know we're going to see some important information presentation from the index.
Great. Good evening. As Michael said, I'm Jocelyn Wenk with the Roush Foundation, the Long Island Index. We will be showing you a video shortly about Long Island at a tipping point. The video was released by the Long Island Index last year, 2012. And looks at how we could build a stronger regional economy with higher paying jobs and more opportunity. As you'll see in the video, the Long Island region has the potential to become an innovation powerhouse if we use our assets wisely. We have a skilled, highly educated workforce, world-class research institutions and universities, a growing network of entrepreneurs, collaborative regional efforts like Accelerate Long Island, which is helping to drive the creation of startup companies, proximity to New York City, an extensive transportation infrastructure, and, though delayed, the East Side Access Project, beaches, I couldn't neglect that, being close to Centerport, and more than 100 downtowns across our 2 counties. But the video raises the question, will businesses move to Long Island or stay on Long Island if we remain a region where workers, even middle-income professionals, are struggling to find affordable places to live? From my perspective as a 34-year-old, everything comes down to housing. Since the Index's first report 10 years ago, we've documented that Long Islanders are overwhelmingly concerned about young people leaving the region. In survey after survey, we hear Long Islanders are very worried about the high cost of living chasing away young adults. And we know from our research that Long Island has had the lowest share of 25 to 34-year-olds in the New York metropolitan region for more than a decade. We lost 15% of our 25 to 34-year-olds between 2000 and 2009, compared to a 5% gain nationwide. It's a crucial age group, 25 to 34-year-olds, because those are the new entrants to the labor force, the people who will be paying taxes for our schools, services, healthcare for the elderly, the people who will be growing our economy. Why are we losing young people? I think we've heard it from all the panelists tonight. Compared to other suburbs in the region, northern New Jersey, southwest Connecticut, the Hudson Valley, we have by far the smallest share of rental housing. Only 1 out of 5 housing units is a rental on Long Island, compared to a ratio of at least 1 out of 3 in the region's other suburbs. As Craig said, we are the exception to the norm. So back when I was one of those young people in my 20s, just out of school, I lived in the suburbs of Detroit in a town called, or a city called Royal Oak. I wanted to briefly tell you tonight about Royal Oak because it's very similar to Huntington, but different in some critical ways. Just like downtown Huntington, downtown Royal Oak has a great scale, tons of activity on the sidewalks, great restaurants, a farmer's market, cultural life and nightlife, and surrounding the downtown, beautiful neighborhoods of single-family homes. But unlike downtown Huntington, or Huntington as a whole, the town, where the housing stock is just 16% rentals, 30% of the housing stock in Royal Oak is rentals. And Royal Oak is continuing to diversify its housing options and to attract young people. At the time that I was living there, every day when I would go out walking, I would see another construction project underway in the downtown or in the vicinity of the downtown. Parking lots that had been underutilized that were being turned into new ground floor shops with apartments and condos above, structured parking, deck parking hidden behind. New residential units were even being added above existing one-story buildings on Main Street in Royal Oak. Vacant land near the downtown was being redeveloped with really good-looking townhouses, brick row houses. Old warehouses were being converted into lofts and were winning awards from architectural organizations. And Royal Oak was attracting young people, 20-somethings, in droves, unlike Huntington, unlike Long Island. To bring this back to Long Island, we have more than 100 downtowns across the island. Altogether, they represent a major untapped asset that we could be using to address the regional challenge of our loss of young people. In 2010, we looked across the Long Island region, the index looked across the Long Island region, and we found that there are 8,300 acres of underutilized land within a half mile, which means roughly within walking distance, of our downtowns and our train stations. That's the equivalent of about almost 7,600 football fields worth of land. So without developing a single acre of farmland and forests, we could be building housing for the next generation of Long Island's workers right within our train station areas and our downtowns.
The purpose of the program is about trusteeship. Is about being a trustee for your community.
Really connects regular people to the community in ways that is very profound, actually.
It's an education for your employees.
That's where Leadership Huntington can really help bring it out in showing them leadership not only in your community, but that leadership then shines through into your workplace. Because the people now understand that they're earning people's respect, understand that they need the education to move to the next level.
I think we have 8 or 9 graduates of the leadership program at H2M, and frankly, we use it as a training tool.
If there's an organization that your company needs to get in touch with, there will be a leadership grad that your employee can contact and say, hey, I need to talk to you about this issue.
I'm a big proponent of getting involved in your community and giving back. My father taught me that, my mother taught me that. I've always had a love of the town of Huntington, and living here and having children here, always felt that it was part of my job to get people that I know and friends involved, giving back.
I don't know anybody who's gone through this program, or 275 graduates, that hasn't really appreciated and been very positive about their experience and what it's done for them as individuals and as part of the community.
You're truly developing leadership traits and leadership skills. So I think that the investment is well worth it. And I'd say if you're on the fence about doing it or putting through a candidate, put through one candidate, try it. And I think you'll find that you're going to be putting through candidates every year.
And now for more about our future on Long Island, the tipping point.
Long Island is at a tipping point. One where we decide to move forward, or we fall into some pretty dark times. Even before the recession, it was hard to find a job. Taxes keep going up. Young people keep moving away. But it's not like this everywhere. Some places are beating the odds. Why do so many talented people move to those places? Why do businesses invest there? And how come for them, each success creates another one? It turns out these places have a lot in common. World-class research centers that spawn innovative ideas. Top-notch universities that turn out visionary talent. And technology clusters big enough to trigger a chain reaction of success. You know something? Long Island has these things, and they're actually starting to show results. Increased private investment, a lot more government funding, thousands of new patents. But let's face it, Long Island is no Silicon Valley. So what's missing? The truth is, venture capital isn't just attracted to certain businesses. It's attracted to certain places. Successful regions are built on thriving communities. Communities where creative young people want to live and work. Where research centers, entrepreneurs, and government leaders work together to move the region forward. This is what Long Island needs. Our assets working together to create a place that draws talent and investment. How do we make it happen? Well, we have these great downtowns with a fantastic rail system that should be the center of local business and community. But they're not. 4 out of 5 Long Islanders worry that the high cost of living will chase away their family members. How are we going to convince businesses to move here or even just stay here if we can't convince our own kids? Companies won't build here if there's no place for their people to live. Kids fresh out of college won't move back if they can't pay the rent. They can't even find a place to rent. Constructing apartment buildings and condos will bring life back to our downtowns. It's a tried and true strategy that's already worked for our neighbors. And they're not worried about their kids leaving. It's time for us to build differently. We have great schools that should be training kids for the future. But they're not. The investment money flowing into Long Island will create a broad range of new jobs, from research scientists to technicians. All our kids deserve a shot at filling them. Some of our schools are doing great, but others are struggling. With so many school districts, we need a smarter way to make sure all students get the same chance, no matter where they live. If you look at the top-ranked U.S. high schools, magnet schools focusing on science and math consistently finish at the front of the pack. Why can't we try them on Long Island? One program open to all students who want it. It's time for us to create a pipeline from good schools to good jobs. Can we do it? We've had a lot of good ideas that didn't make it to the finish line. You ever hear of the maglev train? It was designed here at Brookhaven National Labs. We were going to build it to run right down the center of the Long Island Expressway. Could have been amazing. It never happened. You want to see one? Hey, go to China. But this time could be different. We have the assets. And the public is ready. Polls show Long Islanders support magnet schools and they want downtown development. To make this happen, though, all these pieces have to come together. We need affordable housing choices. We need schools training our students for the jobs that will be coming here. And we need a community to welcome this new breed of businesses and talent. People say change isn't in our DNA. We're scared. And it's understandable given how much we've all invested in our homes, our schools, our communities. Change feels awfully risky. But if we don't make changes, that lifetime of savings has nowhere to go but down. When half of our residents are thinking about moving someplace else, Something's got to give. We can't waste this chance. Let's build a better future. Honestly, it's the only option.
I just have a quick question. One, in the video, did it say only 15% of Long Island high school students are college ready? Was that the statistic I saw?
I think the concern that was raised in the video is that we have, I think, an outstanding public school system here on Long Island, but the disparities, educational disparities, are very high. We have some of the most segregated schools in the country. So when we look at, for example, Long Island's high poverty schools, the schools that have the greatest concentration of poverty, those schools are 90% Black and Latino population. So those schools where there's a concentration of poverty, that's where we're seeing our English language learners concentrated. Those schools are failing to prepare the next generation of Long Islanders for jobs.
Well, I would also like to ask, I'm very involved with the Harborfield School District and the declining enrollment between the tax cap, pension costs, and cuts in state aid is killing us. And so what are your suggestions other than, is housing your only suggestion to keep the young people here? Because if we don't get the young people here and have kids, we really are in trouble.
So I would make a comment and hope to go to the panel on that. I found that article very, very interesting in terms of the decline in school population, and unfortunate, because we do have this tremendous asset in these tremendous school districts that we pay a lot of money for. But what's fascinating about that, and I'm sure Jocelyn and others in the panel could add to this, for years we have seen school boards, not the Harborfield School Board necessarily, but we have seen school boards come to town board meetings, to village board meetings, saying, we don't want the multifamily housing, we are against density because we're concerned that it's going to generate too many students into our school district. So do they declare success? No, because now we're going to lose the tax base, we're going to lose the schools, and we're going to lose people to take advantage of the fact that we have this great asset. So I think you bring out a great point, and if anything, that shows that this is a tremendous, important work in progress. Anyone on the panel?
Well, just to address, related to what you said, it's a common misconception out there to a lot of people that single-family home residential is a tax positive on the community, that people who live in homes, and people say, well, my tax bill is $15,000 a year. Certainly I am producing for the community. A home paying $15,000 in property taxes is a tax loser for the community. General planning principle, residential for the most part is a tax loser. Residential people require services. They need the garbage picked up, they need schools, they need libraries, they need streets plowed. Residential homes require services. Tax positives are businesses, commercial and industrial land. That is who pays the taxes. Highest taxpayer in the town is the Northport Power Plant, possibly the largest taxpayer on Long Island in terms of property taxes. You look at what the power plant pays, what Waltman Mall generates not only in property taxes but in sales taxes, is if you want to have a good tax base, if you want to have lower taxes, you need a strong commercial and industrial sector. And that is a requirement. It's one of the problems you see in the suburbs, the problems we face when you're on a property tax system, is what percentage of the town rides the train to New York City every day? Well, New York City is getting the property taxes from those businesses. Obviously Long Island wouldn't be here without New York City. We don't really have a choice in that matter. But based on the property tax system, the way it runs, the suburbs has a disadvantage because they're always going to be losing people to jobs in the cities, and that's where the tax revenue is going.
I think he pretty much covered it.
I think I noticed in the video it said that 61% of the population favor rental units. Where are these people? Because every time a housing project is proposed, it seems like the only people who are yelling are against it, as opposed to for it. So where is the 61%? I mean, I'm one, but I mean, when they're brought before a town board, it seems like everybody is just lobbying against them.
Yes,
I think if anything else, it just speaks to self-interests. I mean, people tend to be concerned in their own little parochial street-by-street impacts. So if there's a vacant piece of land and you just go out a quarter of a mile in any direction and you propose multifamily housing or apartments above stores or something that's out of the norm, out of the typical cookie-cutter single-family home zoning code where you have distinct industrial, commercial, and residential districts, people in that area get their backs up and they apply political pressure, and then that, of course, translates into a lack of will.
Jocelyn?
I think our hope, we're always surprised when our survey data finds that there is such high support, given that NIMBYism is constantly in the papers here on Long Island and so prevalent. I think our hope is that the statistics, the survey data that we've gathered will help give elected officials the courage to do what Joy Brown calls going out on a ledge, standing out on a ledge, and to realize that they're not actually out on a ledge. It's not quite as scary as they might think. There is more support for making some of the critical changes that we do need to make here in our region, despite some of the opposition that might seem so loud.
I think that is a great point about the political will, but also so the political leaders and the elected see that, but also just people get to know that really our community is okay with this. Our community generally would like to see this, and I think that's another part of the informative piece from the index video.
A question and a comment. I heard this afternoon, illegal housing has been a big sort of elephant in the room for a long time in Huntington. I heard that perhaps approximately 2,000 out of the old standard figure of maybe 10,000 units had been legalized. So just putting that off to the side, we like to think of ourselves in Huntington as a sophisticated, town, I think, but we really don't operate by business thinking. For example, this afternoon at a meeting, we were reminded that if the average cost of an education of a student, like in high school, is $24,000 a year, $100,000 spent on each student goes off to wherever, to Europe or to California or Florida or, and we don't seem to recognize this collectively as a loss that you've said in other ways. I'm just saying it in a way that hit me today, that somehow we help to rephrase, and I think the video did it nicely, in a way that makes sense to people today. If they don't want to hear about the Rutgers study of how many average children live in an apartment complex, and everybody knows what they think they believe, and they don't really want to change those things. So we need help to come at these issues from different sides. When I've talked to groups over many years, I would stand in front of a group and say, okay, how many of you have ever in your life lived, been a renter, lived in a rented apartment or a rented house? And I put my own hand up and other people's hand. We're not comfortable putting ourselves in the shoes, even of our friends and relatives yet, not to mention ourselves at other phases in our own life. Just think what it takes to make a community with all these life cycles and all the different types of needs.
Yeah, I think one of the points there, Jen, is that one of the potential benefits of the aging population is that people like me and my wife Judy have sons who are at that age who are looking for rental housing or starter housing because they like to stay in Long Island. So maybe that's going to add to that voice that turns around and say, yeah, that's a good idea. We'd like to have those housing choices.
I don't really have a question. I'd just like to add a comment. That's probably one of the only developers in the room. One of the things that we've learned over the years is that one of the reasons that you only hear the naysayers is because it's a lot easier for people to get riled up against something than it is for something. I'd say this room is definitely an exception to that rule because there's obviously a lot of people that care about change and, changing with the times, but, it's important for folks that are in support of things like retaining youth to come out to meetings, to planning board meetings, to show their support, because oftentimes they just assume it's going to go through, and it's only the naysayers that basically show up. So that's my experience.
Thank you. Well, I'm sorry, one more back here. Then
I've always thought.
We'll have the microphone person, then we'll come back over to you. Okay? Go.
Okay. I do feel that a lot of the reason we're having such difficulty in trying to change our housing landscape is because it's true, like Mr. Turner was saying, we're not familiar with the way other people live. For example, my trip to Bethpage, Maryland really helped me to understand that you can have a very thriving and popular community where there's a mixture of housing and people are all very happy and they want to move these apartments, where people can have lovely apartments with granite countertops for the same price as somebody's basement on Long Island. It sounds like a great place. And I just also wanted to comment a little bit randomly, I admit, because Mr. Carr had mentioned about the problem with healthcare, and just so happened to be reading Time magazine this morning, and they were really addressing the problem of the way we're framing the debate in terms of not who pays for healthcare, but why the healthcare costs are so exorbitant. They had many tragic stories about people being surprised, thinking they had good health insurance, and then finding out that instead of spending $5,000, they're spending $60,000 and becoming bankrupt. And I think that's a worthwhile article to read, just to understand how maybe we're, according to this magazine, we're building gilded hospital systems and little Dubais, and we're not really understanding how we can play this new game.
Yeah, I'll just mention one of the statistics. You mentioned Time magazine. For the first time in Time magazine's history, they dedicated an entire issue to one subject, and that was the one that was this past week. So a lot of people were talking about it on blogs and stuff. But the reason I raised this very simply is that when I was looking at statistics, and I didn't know until last night I was going to speak about this, I figured I'd speak about housing or something, is if New York State just offered, just on the healthcare component, I said it's taking up half of the state budget now. If New York State just offered what most other states offer, which is at bare bones, Lyndon Johnson, 1965, you've just got to offer these items and not an enhanced Medicaid. If you just offered what other states are offering, you'd save $9 billion a year out of $138 or whatever billion dollar New York State budget. $9 billion is huge. In 1 year, what would you do with that? You could pay down the shore-in debt, which means how you lower Long Island's electric rates to nothing. You could take the $6 billion, the other $3 billion, you could take $1 billion of that and rebuild the Tappan Zee Bridge with the proper transit. You could take another $2 billion and maybe put in a cross harbor tunnel. You could do that in 1 year. Then next year, you have another $9 billion to play with. So it is huge.
Everyone is interested in getting good information, getting it from the proper sources. There are lots of things that we're involved in, or roads we can take as Long Islanders, things we can support, and we need to be knowledgeable more so now than ever.
Thank you so much for joining us today.
Help us keep the conversation going.
Please visit www.leadershiphuntington.org. You can also find us on Facebook at Community Conversations Huntington NY.
Thank you.
And I think it could be good for people who are interested, people who